My name is Danielle, and I will be your host for today's conversation. The topic of discussion is understanding U.S. pharmaceutical information exchange, specifically in regards to the DSCSA. So you should be a little familiar with the term, but we'll get into the details in a short bit. This conversation is specifically designed for wholesale distributors. So we'll talk a little bit more about what distributors specifically need to be doing to remain compliant with the DSCSA. So I won't take up too much time now. Let's get into the introductions. We have Darren Myher of Link ERP speaking with us today, and we have Gary Lerner from Gateway Checker, president of Gateway Checker. So BlueLink and Gateway Checker do work very closely together as partners to ensure wholesale distributors in the pharmaceutical space can remain compliant while still running their distribution businesses effectively. So keep in mind, both speakers are very familiar with the requirements, and this interview is going to be compiled of frequently asked questions. If there are any questions that we don't answer, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them before the end. So let's get into it. The pharmaceutical industry right now, they're trying to understand why serialized inventory or serialized files, my mistake there, are important. So Darren, maybe you can speak to this a little bit and BlueLink ERP's role in it.
Yeah, so BlueLink ERP is first and foremost an ERP system. It's the software that you use to run your company as a distributor, keeping track of everything from orders, purchasing, inventory management, and the actual day-to-day running of the business is actually done through that software. When it comes to your requirements under DSCSA, however, it's not good enough to just have your own silo of information. You now need to be able to receive files that tell you from your suppliers about what's in the shipment that they're sending to you. You're going to have to verify that the products you received against those files match up. And as a distributor, you're now going to be responsible for creating those files outbound to your customers, whether they're in a position to consume those files or not. So that's kind of your high-level overview.
Awesome, thank you. So specifically, it sounds like there needs to be some kind of specific solution for the DSCSA. So when distributors are looking for solutions, what would you say are the minimum requirements that they need to be looking for to remain compliant with the DSCSA?
Yeah, so at minimum, there's some requirements imposed on you as a distributor that I just mentioned as well. You do have a requirement under DSCSA to verify that the products that you receive from your suppliers matches up with the electronic files that they've sent to you about what they've shipped to you. You do have requirements to produce, scan, the serial numbers that you're shipping outbound to your customers and be able to produce a file that those customers can consume on their side. There are some other requirements around serialized returns as well. If you do accept returns in your business, you're going to have to verify that the information on those products that have been returned matches up with what the manufacturer has on file. And there's some technologies that we'll mention during this webinar to talk about that as well.
Awesome. So you mentioned that the requirements to receive and send serialized data is necessary for distributors. So Gary, maybe I can pass off to you. This process of receiving and shipping of serialized data, can it be performed manually and still comply with the DSCSA?
It can't be really received manually because the law requires electronic interoperable exchange of information. So that is sort of written into the law, and it's expected. And in fact, FDA has said they're not going to come look for physical pieces of paper. They're going to be looking for your electronic records. So it's really important that you receive the digital representation of the information electronically in an interoperable fashion. Those are the key aspects of it.
Perfect, thanks. So obviously, like you said, the electronic aspect is mandatory. So in some cases, some businesses already have solutions in place. So Darren, maybe you can talk about the integration aspect of it. How will these, file solutions integrate with what they've already got?
So we have seen some distributors who can't afford to switch ERP systems try to implement kind of a bolt-on solution for compliance reasons. So in that case, maybe they're purchasing a siloed system that is able to receive those files electronically, lets them do their verification, and lets them produce a file outbound. But you may find yourself in a situation where you have to duplicate all of that information. So information about your purchase orders to your suppliers might have to be in your main ERP system, but also be entered into some other system. You might have to duplicate every order outbound to a customer in your main ERP system to run your business, plus in those other systems as well. So there is an opportunity, if you're able to find a system that can be your ERP and also allow you to comply, then there's efficiencies to be gained there.
Yeah. So they could use standalone solutions if they wanted to, but that's not really the most efficient or effective way to do things.
Yeah, exactly. But those standalone solutions themselves must still be able to meet the, what Gary mentioned in terms of the electronic interchange. It's not going to be good enough to receive a file and print it out and manually compare to the file.
Yeah, gotcha. So maybe just to kind of piggyback on other processes like warehouse procedures, just standard operating procedures, what kind of changes can people expect there in terms of their warehouses?
So that's a really important question, because one of the things that some business owners don't realize is while maybe you're checking the boxes in terms of what the software needs to do, have you thought about the operations team and what your people in the warehouse actually have to do differently? So again, if you think about it in terms of the inbound operations, maybe today a shipment would show up from a supplier, you're just checking for damage and checking the quantities overall, and then putting that product away in the warehouse shelving right away. That's not good enough under DSCSA. You actually have to do the scan verification or comparison of the serial numbers against the inbound file. That's going to maybe alter your workflow in the warehouse and take additional time. Maybe you need to stage it differently or have computer equipment in the back that wasn't previously in your staging area or your receiving area that now needs to be there. Likewise, on the way out, in terms of shipments outbound, you have to make sure that you've got a moment in time in your picking workflow where you're scanning these items to gather the serial data that then needs to be included in those files. So if your current workflow doesn't include scanning verification on the way out, or your current system only is grabbing lot information and not grabbing serial data, then maybe you need to, if you're using a separate system, you need to duplicate a second scan in the second system. Or if you're using an integrated system like BlueLink, now that one scan is achieving both of those objectives, getting your serial data and your lot data up to date.
Yeah, perfect. And everybody, before we get into the next questions about EPCIS files, I just wanted to reiterate that with your current workflows, if you are a little bit confused about your current workflows, are they managing lots and serial numbers? The whole point of the system evaluation questionnaire is for you to ask those questions for yourself and for you to realize, are my current systems and processes compliant, or what needs to be changed? So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, the questionnaire you get at the end is a great starting point, especially as a business owner, to just assess your current capabilities and also, your plan forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gary, I'm going to head over to you again and talk about the actual EPCIS files. That's what's going to be holding the serialized data. So what requirements do distributors have to receive an EPCIS file from a supplier?
Well, from a receiving standpoint, the best way to do it is through some secure protocol. We use the AS2 protocol, but there are different ways files can be exchanged. There can be some direct connections, there can be manual uploads and things like that. But in terms of handshaking, pretty much GS1 identifiers are required on both ends. That you need to establish GS1 company prefixes or GS1 SGLN identifiers to uniquely identify each entity. And that's really important from our application standpoint, because we automatically route inbound files directly into subscribers' accounts based on that information. So we do spend in the setup and staging process a little bit of time trying to capture and verify and validate those pieces of information. So if you have a GS1 identifier that identifies your site, you're in good shape. If you don't know what it is or haven't established one, you better go ahead and get that in place at this point in time.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of time, so now's the time if you haven't already, for sure. Gary, you talked about your application and how it captures the information. So Darren, what I want you to talk about or answer is why can't BlueLink just accept this stuff automatically on its own? Why do we need to have a third-party solution?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good example of companies doing what they do best. So BlueLink's primarily an ERP software developer. We're focused on the inventory management, order management, the tools that your employees would actually interact with in the warehouse. What we don't do is we're not an expert on AS2 data transmission and secure file transfers and doing all of the things that Gary's team and the Gateway Checker team are experts in. So we let them be the experts in moving data around, parsing the data, validating that the format of the data that they've received is actually valid and is well constructed, so that when BlueLink connects and we ask the Gateway Checker system, hey, give us the latest information that's come in, we've got a nice, already clean file that is in a format that we can understand and present to the users through the software. And then likewise, on the way out, we're presenting the Gateway Checker system with the contents of what your team did, the scans that you've performed, and then they're translating that into a compliant file format that's been validated and is the right structure that other systems are going to be able to consume. So we're able to take advantage of the years of experience that his team has in terms of both how the files are structured, but also how to interact and communicate between systems.
If I may add one thing to that, Darren, one of the things that we're doing uniquely, first of all, we're very focused on the EPCIS standard, having been involved in the initial drafting of the standard going back to 2016, and being a GS1 certified conformance testing service. We're the only practicing GS1 conformance testing service in the United States. And that means that GS1 has examined our application and make sure that we are following the standards and can assess a good file from a bad file. But we took that experience and expertise and integrated it in with our application, and hence BlueLink as well. So collectively, we represent, I think, one of the only companies that's doing 100% trace-ready assessment. Every file that comes in, we're automatically assessing it for its compliance and conformance to GS1 application standards, as well as the HDA requirements. We do that on inbound and outbound to assure that we've got good data integrity, but also compliance, and that we're not missing critical pieces of information.
Yeah, and I think that's important for the audience to realize, is that having a kind of an all-in-one solution, or a solution that can kind of do everything, is necessary at this point. So we're going to move on a little bit. So this one is for Darren. Why is the process being used between BlueLink and Gateway Checker different than other processes?
Yeah, so I guess we can just reemphasize that the handoff of information, right? So the Gateway Checker system is receiving those files, they're pulling them apart, they're handing off nice clean data about what the serial numbers are that were transmitted, including the aggregate information. So one of the keys there is that, for example, imagine a pallet of product shows up. That pallet, the entire pallet, is going to be identified with a serialized shipping container label, an SSCC label. It's possible in the BlueLink system to scan that label, and then we can look up in the file that we've received from the Gateway system all of the serial numbers and cases and information that's on that pallet. So you could end up with a much more efficient process in terms of receiving those files inbound. There's also other functionality related to the inventory management and ERP side of things, that if you happen to be using an ERP system and not just a separate system, then that data about the products that have shown up now can flow into your purchase order receiving process, and then that can make for a more efficient PO receipt. There's no chance of duplicate data being miskeyed by an end user, for example, when you're using everything in one system.
Perfect. And Gary, just a follow-up question for you. From your end, can you put multiple purchase orders on one transaction?
Yes, you can, and I think you need to do that, and people increasingly are doing that. It doesn't happen that often, but it is definitely starting to happen. The key there is to make sure the serial numbers are associated with a particular PO.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of the areas we spent development time on as well, is to ensure that if a mixed pallet were to show up, for example, that actually represents multiple purchase orders, your team in the warehouse can just scan what they have in front of them, and then we're worrying about matching it up with what the data coming in is behind the scenes for the user, so they
Yeah,
don't need to worry about, oh, that's purchase order 1 and that's purchase order 2.
I think the beauty of what we put together collectively is that you often don't see the integration because it is so seamless, because you can work pretty much entirely within the BlueLink application. And someone actually asked me today, well, how will we know that the data is there? Or what is it that we have to do? Well, once we're connected to your trading partners or your customers, the information is instantly available to BlueLink. So there isn't another layer of uh, testing and certification and that kind of stuff that you have to do. Once we've made the connection, once the information's flowing, it's readily accessible within BlueLink. And then anything that happens to that data, anything throughout the life cycle of that serial number that BlueLink may update, like opening up a shipper case or whatnot, that's automatically known to our application as well. So that when you come to ship to your customers, we already have the accurate, up-to-date information, and there's no extra steps that you need to take to communicate from one application to the next.
And what about accuracy, Gary? How do we ensure that the EPCIS data file structure is correct and the contents are correct?
Yeah, so we run literally hundreds of checks. I mean, that is our core capability, this conformance testing that we put together. And in fact, that's one of the ways that Darren and I got to know each other,
Yeah.
because he sat in on some of the committees and things that we're doing. So we're actually reading every file that comes in, and we're reading every file that comes out, and we actually assess its readiness. So when information is missing or perhaps not exactly correct, we'll flag it as either being a failure or an alert or a warning, so that people can take corrective action on the various
Yeah.
files.
It's been interesting while we've been implementing this as well, where Gary's actually, his team has received a file from a distributor, in some cases from relatively large distributors, and noticed that the aggregate data is missing for some items, like, or they'll send the data for a case, but not what's inside the case. So we don't know what the bundles are inside, or the serial numbers of the eaches, and that's going to get caught automatically by the trace ready system and get flagged, and not result in bad data ending up in the ERP system. And then Gary's team has been successful in going back to those suppliers and waving by the way, did you know that file that you sent us had the following errors, and it's made it a lot better in terms of during the stabilization period that we're in right now to identify those issues and get them corrected before the FDA brings down the hammer and actually expects everything to work. So
Yeah, we even look for sequence of events. Things are supposed to happen in sequence, and we've had some, to your point, Darren. We've had some files that have been packed after they've been shipped,
yeah.
right? Which physically can't happen. But we know that people obviously aren't reading and checking their files, because we shouldn't be able to find these things as often as we do. So it's good for our customers. I think we're helping to ensure integrity, both inbound but also outbound. So we think that's really important. And we will be gateway certifying those customers that we work with that fully comply on sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval that we'll be adding as part of our joint application to the BlueLink data environment.
Mhm. Perfect. So audience, we are kind of approaching our last final question. So I just want to reiterate, if you do have other questions, please put them in the chat and we can try and get to them. But I do want to jump to one question that I think is worth us talking about. And this one could be for either Darren or Gary, but some distributors have received product, before EPCIS came into law. So those distributors who have cases which don't have inbound data, how do they ship them in compliance with the DSCSA?
Well, our system would know, right, whether we have a record for that information or not, based on our life cycle approach. So if we've received the serial numbers in, we know, and we can approve and send it out. But by contrast, we also know when we don't have that information. So when we don't have that information, we present that to the user, and we give them the opportunity to substantiate that indeed it is a good product. We can verify the product because we have product verification capabilities built in. So we can go back to the manufacturer and verify its product identifier. but we also can provide the ability to commission the product on behalf of the supplier, the distributor, I should say, and keep records of the fact that they have bought other products on the same lot, right? They may not have been able to substantiate this particular order, but they can do that. The one downside, and Darren reminds me of this often, is that if it's a factory sealed case, there's no way to know what the contents are.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, for any of the legacy product, you need to open up the cases and scan at the each level, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to get people to be proactive and get onboarded now, to get their inventory captured even before BlueLink comes online. Because as long as we're receiving the data in, as soon as the BlueLink connection is established, we can make all of those serial numbers available to the BlueLink user.
Yeah, that's a really important real world risk to your business operations. Is if you find yourself come November of this year with a warehouse full of product that you don't know what the aggregate data is for what's inside those boxes, if you to comply with the letter of the law, you have to provide the serial information at the lowest saleable unit of measure, which means exactly what Gary mentioned. You have to open those cases. Imagine you have a case of 100 units. You have to open that case of 100 units. You can't just scan the case now because it goes and looks up in the system and says, oh, sorry, we don't have inbound data. We don't know what's in that case. So now you have to open that out, take 100 products, line up the barcodes, and then do 100 individual barcode scans just so you can ship that case of 100 units. So, we don't want you to end up in that situation. So getting the data flowing inbound as soon as possible is really important. Even if you weren't live on the BlueLink system yet, if you've got your inbound connections configured with the gateway team and they're receiving that data when you do go live on the BlueLink system later, all of that backflows into the system, and we can make use of anything you've gathered over the last several months, for example. So it's an important operational thing to realize, and you may, if you find yourself with a system that doesn't do that, you may need to start staffing up now. Like think about how many employees am I going to need come November to be able to handle this potentially massive increase in the amount of work that has to be done to just comply with the law.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that there's not a lot of time. People gotta get running right now. Get started now with that stuff if you haven't already. So let's just get over to our final questions and just some parting thoughts. So Darren, can you just talk kind of more generally about what are the risks for a distributor simply if they don't comply?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately we're in the, I guess, the transition period right now. The FDA, the law is actually technically already in effect, and the FDA is using their discretion to, they're calling the period between now and November of 2024 as a stabilization period. They're expecting, if they went and visited any distributor, they would be able to see your team actively engaged in the process of making these systems communicate, making it work, modifying your business procedures to actually, engage. And come November, if you don't have those systems in place and you're not actually transmitting the data, now you actually are in violation of the rules of the law. So, I'm not an FDA person, so I can't speak exactly to how they're going to penalize you. Just realize that you don't want to put yourself in that position as a business owner.
If I can add, one thing that's emerged literally within the last 1 to 2 months has been two different phenomena that both are probably another aspect of risk. One is the major wholesalers have set April 1st as a deadline for all manufacturers to be onboarded, but that actually impacts some of our distributors who might be a single entity or an authorized distributor that may be selling product to the big three. So to avoid big penalties, you really need to be onboarded ASAP, or at least talk to or get registered with the big three wholesalers. The other phenomena that we've seen is that a number of large pharmacies, or chains of pharmacies, they've started to threaten to cut off buying from certain entities if they can't demonstrate that they're compliant. So, whereas there's a lot of regulatory pressure and the FDA has some real penalties that they could apply, I think the larger issue for a lot of us as business people is we're going to lose revenue, or it could really be at risk. And the flip side is also true, which is if you were compliant and you were ready to go today, you might actually win incremental business, because there are definitely both pharmacies and large chains that are looking to only buy from those that can provide them with serialized transactions.
Yeah. I mean, it ties nicely into kind of one of the other questions around, costs and connections. Like we talked about electronic transfer of information as a requirement, but there's more than one way to accomplish electronic transfer of information. So for example, if you're selling into mom and pop pharmacies who don't have electronic or systems that can receive these files through AS2 connections, you would be able to have that pharmacy log into a website, for example, and then look at their sales history and then download the file that you make available. So the files are, in the BlueLink example, the file is still being generated by the BlueLink Gateway Checker system, but now it's being made available through a web portal to your end customers. So even if your customers aren't all in a position where they can receive those files now, you're at least still complying with the law, and you can show an FDA auditor this customer just needs to log into this website and link, and now they've received their file in a secure, interoperable manner.
Yeah, that's a great point, Darren. So, for example, if anybody just doesn't have the electronic capability to send or receive anything AS2 connection-wise, they can do it through a web portal, for example, as another option.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to stop it off there. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
And thank you, Danielle. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And
Bye.
Darren, good to see you guys. Yep, take care. Bye.